Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Tonight, we would like to focus on the root cause why Zimbabwe is a failed state and we are stuck. In my opinion, the main reason we are a failed state is that we have failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections. Zanu PF, ever since the country's independence in 1980, has blatantly rigged the elections to ensure that they stay in power. At the heart of our problem is Zanu PF's belief that they have the divine right to rule the country. And they've imposed that right ruthlessly. They have again and again in the last 46 years shown that they will burn the country down. Each time somebody threatened their hold on power. The very first elections in 1980, they made it very clear that if Zanu PF does not win the elections, the Bush war would continue. They didn't say the Bush war would continue if elections are not free, fair, and credible. As long as Zanu PF does not win the elections, the Bush war would continue. The party's belief that they have the divine right to rule the country has been at the heart of where we are today. Chris Mnangagwa has made this point abundantly clear if you look at the history of the country. In this particular video, he is reminding people of that fundamental belief.
From power before his mandate was due. You removed President Robert Gabriel Mugabe. Why can't you allow others, if they so wish, to do what you did?
The reason why President Mugabe had to be removed is very clear. Along the way, he had decided to create a dynasty out of this country. So he was moving with his own succession agenda outside the context of the Zimbabwe people. He had turned his house and his household into a courthouse of intrigue against the constitution of Zimbabwe. This is what then led to those who had put him in power originally, the war veterans. We know where Mugabe came from. We know how he got to that power. We made it possible. The Mnangagwa document, we made it possible. The war which was fought, we made it possible. He has no particular possession of the attributes of that war. He can't say it's my war. He couldn't say it's my war. But he was taking all those sacrifices of the people and turning it into a family dynasty. That's antithesis of the revolution.
The point could not be denied that as far as the regime was concerned, it is what the war veterans decide. Because for him to refer to what happened during the Liberation War in 2017 is absurd. Surely the country had been independent by then, the last 37 years. The mandate to govern the country did not come from the war veterans. We should be looking at the mandate to govern the country as coming from the people in a free, fair, and credible elections. And yet, the 2017 was spearheaded by the war veterans, as Mnangagwa rightly boasts. And in this particular instance, we should remember that in Zimbabwe, ever since the country's independence, all the country's key state institutions like SEC, the police, the army, the judiciary, the war veterans themselves are but a department of Zanu PF. And they are all dedicated to making sure that Zanu PF remains in power until the donkeys grow horns, as some of the leaders have often boasted. This has been at the root of our problem. Welcome to the program, Ben.
Good day to you and good day to our viewers. Thank you for joining us. You know, I think it is on these programs where we have continuously spoken up and said, your vote really does not matter to Zanu PF. It is more of just a formality to show the world that we are holding an election process or an election cycle anyway. That is for show. Who determines the outcome or whatever the outcome is at the end of the day? It's already known by Zanu PF, because we have said they control the likes of ZEC, you know, and all those other institutions that have to do with, you know, our politics basically. So it is just a mere formality. So everybody that seems to be saying, you know, we must be participating, we must be protecting our vote, it really doesn't matter at the end of the day. And I think Chris Mtsangwa is very clear. I don't think anybody needs, you know, us explaining what he just said. Clearly, he's saying it is us who decides what goes on, who stays and who doesn't stay. All this about elections and the mandate of the people is just secondary, you know, speech, just to kind of just whitewash or sanitize, you know, their decision at the end of the day. And again, it leaves the question to say, why do millions of Zimbabweans out there still don't get it that Zanu PF has absolute control of any election outcome? There is no such thing as free, fair, and credible elections in Zimbabwe. It has never happened since 1980. It has been Zanu PF's way or the highway. And that's it, period.
I think it is important that people should understand that after the 1980 elections, Zanu PF, and if anyone had thought that, yes, it was because they feared that the elections in 1980 would not be free, fair, and credible. If that was the case, then when Zanu PF won the elections in 1980, they would have focused on making sure that the country is democratic, the rights of all the citizens of Zimbabwe are paramount. That wasn't the case. As soon as Zanu PF thugs got their feet under the table, within 3 years, they launched the now infamous Gukurahundi. The primary purpose of Gukurahundi was to force the only other political party in the country, which was a serious threat to Zanu PF hegemony, i.e. PF Zapu, to give up its existence as an independent party and join up with Zanu PF. The Gukurahundi lasted until 1987, when PF Zapu finally relented and signed the Unity Accord. That cleared the way for the imposition of the de facto one-party state that has ruled the country to this day. Each time Zanu PF's hold on power was threatened, then the regime would use brutal force. And the opposition were seen as a threat to the regime and were treated accordingly. In 2007, we saw some of the worst violence against the opposition. And SADC had to step in. And it was the SADC leaders who put Zanu PF under pressure to make sure that the 2008 elections were what one can only say is the nearest we've ever got to free, fair, and credible elections. It was then that, for instance, Zanu PF agreed that all votes will be counted at the respective polling station and not taken to some center where they'll be counted. And in some cases, you find ballots disappeared or others were added on en route. This time, only the polling station, each polling station was to count the votes, declare the results, make them public at each polling station. That was the first time the country got nearest to holding free, fair, and credible elections. But as the results started coming out, and Zanu PF realized that the opposition was going to win, the regime stepped in, stopped ZEC counting the results, and it was to take the next 5 to 6 weeks to declare the winners. It doesn't take 6 weeks to count 5 million votes or so, but in Zimbabwe it did. What was actually happening was Zanu PF was whittling down the opposition victory Notably, Morgan Tsvangirai's win was whittled from 73% of the votes, according to Mugabe's slip of the tongue, to 47%, which justified the runoff. Here is Dr. Ibo Mandaza describing the events of the 2008 presidential runoff.
I also know that Mugabe conceded defeat on 2008. He phoned Mbeki and Obasanjo to concede defeat. I hope that Thabo Mbeki and Obasanjo will one day make that public. But one of them, I won't say which one, told me that Mugabe phoned them that Saturday night and said, look, I lost election and I concede defeat. And I know that Mugabe stuck to his guns. I was prepared to go. His wife was since bags packed to go somewhere on the following day when Mnangagwa and Chiwenga approached him and said, you stay where you are. And then they contrived the runoff, sadly with the help of South Africa. And runoff took place, very violent. 360 people were killed. The South African, I came here as part of a delegation to Cape Town to see members of the ANC. I don't want to mention names, they're my friends. I saw them, and through them, a cabinet committee subcommittee of South African cabinet was set up on the Zimbabwe issue. It was on the basis of that cabinet committee that South Africa did not recognize the runoff. And indeed, it was the basis of that committee that Thabo sent the generals to South Africa, to Zimbabwe. I met them, and I was one of the few to have read the report, because I was flying to Joburg in the company of General Romano, who was a friend. He passed away. And I also took people who had lost their hands in the violence to the South African embassy in Harare. And Romano broke down in tears. How can a liberation movement treat these people like that?
That is the key point. How could a liberation movement treat its people like that? And the answer to that is, this is a liberation movement that believes that they have the divine right to rule the country by virtue of conquest. Zanu PF has always believed that. Credit where credit is due. SADC forced them once again to sign the global political agreement which gave birth to the GNU. The primary purpose of the GNU was to implement the democratic reforms which would have ended this culture of violence, of individuals believing they have the divine right to rule. And alas, not even one token reform was implemented during the GNU. And so at the end of the GNU, Zanu PF emerged with all its dictatorial powers intact. This is where we are.
It's what's worrying is that a lot of Zimbabweans and a lot of politicians do not want to talk about that place and time during the GNU where we actually were presented with the golden opportunity. If you try and address it and say, let's talk about, the so-called mistakes, that were made, or the ignorance behind it, the answers you are getting from people is, that is in the past, and let's leave the past behind. Let's move forward. Or it's simply, whitewashed and sanitized again and said, it was a mistake. We could have done better. I think our inability to hold leaders accountable is also part and parcel of why Zanu PF has been able to get away with murder. And not just physical murder, but, murdering off the country, the economy, everything. Because basically, we are saying Zimbabwe is a failed state. It's dead from what it was at the beginning and its prospects. It was supposed to be the next South Korea or Singapore. But we are finding that Zimbabwe is barely staying afloat. It's up to its neck in debt. Zanu PF debt, if I may add. We cannot simply just close history and say it should remain in the past. Because if you are going to school, let's say you are a child going, to school, and you had an exercise on Friday, and it was marked. When you get into school on Monday, it does not mean you must ignore the corrections. I think we all went to school. Whenever you were to go into another, a topic, or to write another, exercise, you had to fix the mistakes that you have made. And with Zimbabwe's case, we are saying, let's not talk about that period. Let's not discuss what flaws and failures our leadership, did. In actual sense, let's not focus on any corrections. Let's just keep going. Now, if you're, again, you're a school-going child, and if you don't do your corrections, you are going into the next grade just as flawed as you were, in the previous. At the end, when you finally write, let's say your ZJC or your ZIMSEC, you are bound to fail because you really did not correct any of the mistakes or whatever mistakes you did in the past. So it is very important that we address. Yes, it will look bad on leadership, because I know a lot of people out there take, Tsvangirai as the hero, the guy that, did something that is extraordinary in trying to change the situation of Zimbabwe. But the truth of the matter is, he didn't do so great. That is the truth of the matter. And historical facts prove that each and every time when SADC came knocking at his door to say, hey, you need to implement reforms, Morgan Tsvangirai closed that door. He ignored that knock up until he decided to go and report SADC to Mugabe. It was Morgan Tsvangirai who did that. So we cannot just forget because we were trying to keep his legacy. If it was tainted, it was tainted. It's just there. It's now history. We have to face it. And I think our ignoring of the fact that Zimbabwe has never had free, fair, and credible elections. Zimbabwe had tasked the opposition to implement reforms to ensure that we stop that. And they failed. Is what has now led us to this point where Zanu PF understands that the opposition will do nothing. And they will do as they please. So I in as much as we want to blame Zanu PF for making a mess out of the country, but the opportunity was given. And we lost that opportunity because we had an incompetent and greedy opposition leadership. That is it.
In the video clip, Chris Mutsangwa, who is a spokesperson of the Zanu PF regime, was talking about the activities of Blessed Geza and his fellow war veterans who had mounted a concerted effort to stop this so-called ED 2030 agenda. And the argument that Blessed Mshanga, the journalist who spoke at the beginning there, was, why are you stopping Geza and others doing what you did to Robert Mugabe? But if Blessed Geza was being honest, brutally honest, he had to admit himself, because he's the one who interviewed Blessed Geza, that Geza was not representing the interests of the ordinary people. Because in that interview, Blessed Geza made it abundantly clear that he was fighting in the corner of VP Chiwenga. He wanted him to be president. So this was not really about restoring the people's rights and ending Zanu PF's claim to divine right to rule. It was just an in-house thing, just as the 2017 military coup was an in-house thing. Zanu PF thugs were fighting among themselves to decide who should be the top dog. Here is the interview I'm referring to.
Aiwaga. Mirani kutauri imwe zvinhu zvinoitika. Hani ndiri kutokutaurira. Kurauza kuti hatina kupusaka because ndiri kutokutaurira kuti tozviziva. You know, takapusaka ndisikakutauriri zvese. We'll deal with this situation at the appropriate time. But ndiri kutotaura kuti commander Chiwenga, Mnangagwa, right? Nava Chiwenga, and right? Ngawa dissolve a political bureau. Tikwane is what is very true. Ngawa dissolve a cabinet. You know, Zinana Kazembe, Vana Soda, Vadan, how would you tell about Nikupani? Vanakamba Muda, Vanan, you know, why do you hate your comrades? You know, kunema general, kunema retired CIO wakawanda, kunema retired commissioners of police and other senior officers wakawanda. Haladiwe.
Maybe The president is looking at capacity and capability.
Bullshit. When I'm grade 7, I have capacity and capability. Grade 7. You know, what a beast you're going. Now, I was Minister of State, Mangwana Provincial Minister. It's terrible. It's terrible. We are not apologetic about it. Children change it. Turn out of Pinda, not out of the president, one was motor, one was she don't have a podcast in.
But you've got your own cars. You've got a hotel at your house that you built in Sanyat. Why do you want all this?
I want to be rewarded as well. Not to be used like a political condom all the time. I'm not a political condom. And urukora wana mahia vaya na vamwa.
That is at the heart of our problem. Many of the war veterans, not all of them, many of them, have been brainwashed into believing that if you're a war veteran, you're extra special. You have got more rights, you've got the veto, when everyone else has got the right to vote, you have the veto. In other words, if the results of the vote, the democratic vote, should not be what you want, you can veto it. You, as a war veteran, have the final say on who governs Zimbabwe, because war veterans have the divine right to rule Zimbabwe. That is the bottom line here. So the 1980 elections did not deliver free, fair, and credible election. One man, one vote was thrown out of the window. The GNU created the opportunity to have that corrected. Not even one token reform was implemented. And so at the end of the GNU, we were back to where we were. I know many people have made a big song and dance about, oh, we got a new constitution. Ask yourself, that constitution was approved in March 2013. A few months later, the nation held the elections. Were those elections free, fair, and credible? The answer is no. So if that constitution was a democratic constitution, why did it fail to deliver one of the most basic rights that it should have delivered? I know some people argue, it's because Zanu PF did not want to implement the electoral reforms. A strong constitution would not allow that. Particularly when you think that even 2023, 10 years later, Zanu PF was still able to rig the elections. If the constitution had been strong, surely, and it created, say, independent judiciary, the judiciary would have said, no, you are supposed to implement these changes. This process is not according to the constitution. But the constitution was weak. And that was deliberate. In fact, Mugabe himself has boasted through his Paul Mangwana, who was the Zanu PF co-chair of the committee that drafted the constitution. Soon after the referendum in 2018, Paul Mangwana is on record boasting that Mugabe dictated that constitution. And this is why we are stuck with it now. It was a dictator's decree. And no wonder it's been so easy for Zanu PF to change it willy-nilly. This is the problem in Zimbabwe. We have a regime that believes that they have the divine right to rule. To this day. And that is the root cause of why Zimbabwe is a failed state. And we cannot move.
You know, each and every time when you play that video clip of the interview of Blessed Geza, and he's speaking about what needs to change in Zimbabwe, and his suggestion is, the president has forgotten is true allies, which in his own opinion, it is the likes of him, more veterans, the retired and so forth. What's so amazing, after you play that interview and you share it with different groups of people on social media and in Zimbabwe, how they said, or how they can perceive that the Geza revolution was a missed opportunity still baffles my mind. Clearly, here is a man that wanted things to change to suit himself and Zanu PF and his old friends. How then does it become ours? And this is not the first time. When Mugabe was ousted by the war veterans and the General Chiwenga, through the military coup, we thought it was ours. It had absolutely nothing to do with us. How does a people get so easily conned to believe that they have a say in what is happening, when even if you play the video back, there is nothing that mentions you and I, and we believe with so much conviction that it is about us? Surely we got to be seriously naive. And the worst part is, it is the intellectuals, the so-called intellectuals, that are falling for this trap. Forget about our uncles and aunties in the in the rural areas that know no better. It is the guys that went to school and did so much that fell for the ED military coup. And it was millions of Zimbabweans out there dancing in the streets, celebrating the a few's victory. And guess what? Down the line, you were left high and dry. Because it was never about you and me. It was about Zanu PF. It was about what Chris Mtswangwa is saying now. That we, the war veterans and the old guard, decide who rules the roost. And it has never been about election. Because if it was about free, fair and elections, me and you would be the ones to rule the roost. So forget about, whole constitutional amendment. As long as Zimbabweans can never hold free, fair and credible elections, you really do not have any meaningful say in who governs the country or whatever happens in the country for that matter. And we have been very, very slow, or we are choosing to ignore it deliberately. Because if it happens once, I would understand. But the fact that it has happened on more than one occasion, it means that we are actually ignoring the facts. And rather, we are comfortable holding on to straws and grabbing whatever, we think or perceive is help. We are in serious, serious trouble. We are in serious, serious trouble, especially when you have what you call the intellect, the high of society, falling victim, not once, but on numerous occasions, for a very silly Zanu PF trap. And we are falling again with this whole constitutional amendment, which means that we have now gotten to a point where we have no longer just a naive, but I think we are ignorant and pretty much foolish.
It's not that all Zanu PF leaders do not know what is going on here. It must be said they do know what is going on. During the GNU, when MDC leaders were failing to implement even one token reform, some of the MDC leaders, Zanu PF leaders, were asked, why are MDC failing to implement reforms? And they boasted that must be an MDC at the. In other words, they knew that Zanu PF had bribed the MDC leadership with the trappings of high office. The E-class Mercedes-Benz limos for all the deputy ministers, right up to Prime Minister Tsvangirai himself. From the MPs, senators, and the ministers, they all received very generous salaries and allowances during the GNU. Tsvangirai himself received the US $4 million house in Highlands. For many of us, we thought that was the end. Turned out they received even more. Information is now beginning to filter through, showing that the MDC leaders got farms and a lot of other things besides during the GNU, and for their role in participating in helping to keep Zanu PF in power ever since. The Zanu PF leaders knew what was going on. They saw that this was helping Zanu PF to consolidate its iron grip on power. And it has. Even soon after independence, some of the Zanu PF leaders were aware what Zanu PF was doing. In the rural areas, in the 1980 elections, the Zanu PF operatives made it no-go area for all the other candidates. That has been maintained to this day. Zanu PF considers the rural areas as its stronghold. And it has done so by intimidation and deliberately keeping the rural voters poor and dependent on the party. In a country where 60% or so of the electorate, the rural voters, have been reduced to nothing more than medieval serfs, forever beholden to their Zanu PF thugs and their proxies. It is totally nonsensical to think that such a country could have a healthy and functioning democracy where leaders are held to account by the electorate. Here is a video clip of one individual, Margaret Dongo, who understood what Zanu PF was doing in the rural areas.
They have wrong priorities, especially the current government. How can you go and build an airport which services a few people, and the majority are the elite and the so-called investors? Look at the rural. I made you come to interview me because I wanted you to have the experience of the roads that we are using. If we go today to our hospital there, you feel pity with that's a hospital in a rural area. If we go to our clinic, you feel pity. We have no piped water here. Do you know the reason why the rural people vote for Zanu PF? One, they're intimidated. Two, the policy is that the rural people should remain poor and subservient to the government. They should remain poor, because if they remain poor, they continue singing the song for their master. This is why these people have been impoverished. It's for a reason. Because at the moment, if you economic empower these people, they'll go out of hand. Zanu PF will never have control over them.
The argument here is, this is at the heart of the problem. If we accept that Zanu PF has got an iron grip on power because they have managed to maintain or to keep about 60% of the rural voters subservient to Zanu PF. The whole point of this constitutional amendment number 3, which some people have taken up with a passion, there's nothing wrong with that. But what I'm saying here is, even if you manage to stop that amendment going through, it will not change the political reality on the ground. Zanu PF still has an iron grip on the 60% or so rural voters. The amendment will not have weakened its stranglehold on the rural voters. One of the ways that Zanu PF has maintained that is denying the rural voters title deeds to even a few acres of land on which their mud hut is built. They've done so for political reasons. Ian Smith, before independence, made a similar choice. He was told in no uncertain terms that if you were to give the rural people in Zimbabwe the title deeds to a few acres of land, they'll be able to build better houses for themselves. When you have got the title deeds you have the confidence that whatever you invest in that piece of land, you can recover some of it. Because you can sell the structure, you can sell it as an ongoing concern with all the developments that you would have made on that piece of land, growing fruit trees, etc. Ian Smith refused to accept that. His argument was simple. If I give these people, I economically empower them, the next thing they would be wanting is political empowerment. He was not ready to give the people the vote. And so he refused to economically empower them. Mugabe was presented with a similar report after independence. And he made the same conclusion. He too did not want to economically empower the rural people because he wanted them to remain serfs, dependent on Zanu PF and its proxies. During elections, these people are frog-marched to attend Zanu PF rallies. They are frog-marched to vote for Zanu PF. In 2023 itself, Mnangagwa was boasting that when it comes to the voting, we will know how you voted. This is the reason why the elections in Zimbabwe, ever since the 2008, have changed in such a way as to neutralize whatever changes SADC had forced onto Zanu PF in 2008. One of those changes, like I said, was forcing that all votes must be counted at the polling station and the results made public. In 2008, there were about 10 polling stations in each constituency. By 2013, the number of polling stations had gone up to 40 plus in each constituency. In 2023, there were over 11,000, over 54 polling stations in a constituency. The reason for it, particularly in the rural areas, is that Zanu PF officials would know, because you could only vote at one designated polling station. They would know who went into that polling station and voted. Say 300 people voted. When the results come out, they find 200 had voted for Zanu PF, 100 had voted for the opposition. The Zanu PF officials will be able to sit within 30 minutes. They'll be able to identify who are those 100 who are likely to have voted for the opposition. So the myth that your vote is your secret was blown out. And they boasted about it. Zanu PF would know how you voted. And if you stay in the rural areas where you could be forced to leave your homestead if the party leaders decide that you were undesirable, you are more careful how you vote. So that is at the heart of the problem. And all this big song and dance about Amendment No.3 would not, the stopping that amendment would not address those core issues that have made Zanu PF Zimbabwe a de facto one-party state, that has given Zanu PF so much power to rig elections. So as much as we can attend to amendment number 3, we must not also forget to address the core issues that have enabled Zanu PF to rig elections and get away with it these last 46 years and counting. That is the argument.
I think we should realize that we have been kicking the can down the road for far too long. And whatever is happening to Zimbabwe, or whatever Zanu PF is doing, all revolves around our election process and how we conduct it. That is our primary problem. We can try and go round it, up, down, sideways. The problem still remains. As long as Zimbabwe cannot hold free, fair, and credible elections, we will never have a people's president. We will never have a healthy and functioning democracy. So those who just want any election, I'm sorry to say, but that does not mean you're a democratic country. Free, fair, and credible elections have to be in that mixed for us to actually say you had a say in your country, or you had a say in who governs the country. A lot of people out there may not understand what constitutes free, fair, and credible elections. But you would expect those that are in urban areas, those that are, heading some of these political groups on WhatsApp and many social media platforms to know and be educating the people. If we continue to ignore, we will run and we will be chasing our tails for as long as we continue on this path. Zanu PF will always throw us a bone and we will be hungry to chew on it. Every time when Zanu PF is pressurized into reforming, into fixing a broken electoral system, they throw us a bone or they throw spanners in the works. And we and our so-called intellectuals or political leaders quickly grab onto that and start fighting over that and forget the primary purpose and the primary problem. So I think we will have to get to a point where we have to realize that whatever we have been doing in the past does not work. Or whatever we have been relying on in the past does not work. Whatever we have been doing on our own is not working, because that is why we are in this problem for 46 years and counting. It is time for us to listen to the advice that we have been given a long, long time, and we are continuously being given. You guys need to fight and fix a broken system, reform it. That is the only way you can get out of this problem. Yes, the amendment must be fixed. Yes, the constitution must be protected. I totally get that. But the only way you're going to protect or fix anything is by fixing the primary problem. And the problem is Zimbabwe has never held free, fair, and credible elections for the past 46 years. And I say, if we are going to stand by it, then we have a fighting chance. So I say again, if there are no reforms, there should be no elections. And we must make that position known. And we must stand and fight for that position. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben. I just want to remind everybody there that you can join us during the weekends on this platform, and the address was given there a few times during the show. And during the weekends, we have a discussion 6 o'clock UK time, 8 o'clock Zimbabwean time. In my concluding remarks, I would like to remind the people of Zimbabwe that Zanu PF has been very careful in how they presented the country's narrative. The party has always managed to twist the narrative in such a way that we ended up with a situation where we believed what the regime wanted us to believe. Particularly when it comes to elections. Mnangagwa has insisted that 2023 elections were free, fair, and credible. That is the narrative that the regime wants to project. As far as he was concerned, the country was ready to move on to the next point. And that's where amendment number 3 comes in. He should be allowed to stay in power an additional 2 more years over and above the maximum two term limits. The people have grabbed that. I've often compared it to a puppy getting excited because somebody has thrown an elephant thigh bone at it. Of course, the puppy cannot even bite into that thigh bone, but it is nonetheless excited about it. Agenda 2023 is meant to be a decoy. Mnangagwa and Zanu PF did not want the nation to discuss the fact that 2023 elections were rigged. SADC and the AU, election observers, said as much. So he proposed that he should be allowed to stay in power and extend his stay in office. And that became the focus. Not knowing that his present term right now is illegitimate. And what is more, our main task should be How are we going to stop this cycle of rigged elections? Rigged elections and bad governance, which is at the heart of why we are a failed state. Stopping him getting additional powers, staying in office for another additional 2 years, will not stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. In other words, all we'll be succeeding in doing there is making sure that beyond 2028, we will not have Mnangagwa as the dictator. We'll have somebody else. This is putting us in the same situation we were in 2017, where people were so focused on Mugabe must go, they neglected to also consider the equally important, in fact, if more important issue of ending the dictatorship itself. Because if we're focused on ending the dictatorship itself, we would not have Mnangagwa. That is what we've got to learn in life. At the present moment, if we focus on ending the dictatorship, the system itself, freeing the people in the rural areas so that they've got a meaningful say, a meaningful vote, making sure that ZEC is competent to carry out its functions, that the police act as an independent body, keeping law and order, and not a Zanu PF department. Those are the changes that will change Zimbabwe. Stopping Mnangagwa staying on for another 2 years will not stop ZEC helping Zanu PF rig the elections. We will still have a dictator, albeit it's not Mnangagwa. We should have learned by now that swapping one dictator for another has not changed anything. We want to end the dictatorship and not just swapping one dictator for another. That's the message we'd like to leave with you today. Thank you very much, those of you who were able to join us. Have a good day.